One day, Europe was attacked from inside, and a Europe which had become Christian suddenly lost its Christianity. While Europe was Christian for those centuries, Christian Europe fought a ferocious battle against riba. Yeah, Christian Europe against riba. In fact, one of the best books on riba ever written was written by a British sheikh. What was his name? Shakespeare, correct. William Shakespeare. Which book? Which book? Merchant of Venice. Merchant of Venice. I will not have the time in this lecture, otherwise you have to give me 3 hours, to explain to you the brilliance of William Shakespeare in Merchant of Venice. But you'll get it, that analysis is there in my big book on riba. In Merchant of Venice, you will see Christian Europe in its attempt to ensure the prohibition of riba. There is another book, not as famous as William Shakespeare's, but this one is also a classic. Take a note of it. You might want to search for it in the library. The name of the book is Religion and the Rise of Capitalism. I would make this compulsory reading in Darul Uloom. Oh yes. Religion and the Rise of Capitalism by an author whose name is R.W. Tawney, T-A-W-N-E-Y. And in this book, Tawney records the Christian struggle against riba in Europe. But when the French Revolution occurred, the back of the Christian church was broken in Western Europe. And when was it broken in Eastern Europe? Which revolution? Bolshevik Revolution. How come we're only getting the answers from this corner? The Bolshevik Revolution broke the back of the Christian church in Eastern Europe, in Russia. When once the back of the Christian church was broken in Europe, the Jews were delighted. The Jews were delighted. Because the Christians had been waging a terrific war against the Jews for centuries in Europe. We will not allow you to lend money on interest. And the Jews always wanted to lend money on interest. Why? Because they had changed the Torah. I think I explained this to you. They rewrote the Torah. The Torah that had come down from Allah had prohibited riba. But they changed it, and the Torah now says, in as many words, that it is haram for a Jew to lend money on interest to another Jew. But it is halal, he can lend on interest to those who are not Jews. Go and check it out. Go and check it out in Deuteronomy, in Leviticus. Go and check it out. I have all of these quotations in my book for you. So they are the money lenders. They changed the word of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded to this in the Quran and points out that they had in effect changed the Torah. Where did he do that? Suratun? Which surah? Suratun Nisa. The language, as I said, was very powerful language. فَبِظُلْمٍ مِّنَ الَّذِينَ هَادُوا حَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ طَيِّبَاتٍ أُحِلَّتْ لَهُمْ. In that ayah, he says, وَأَخْذِهِمُ الرِّبَا وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ. They were taking riba despite the fact that they had been prohibited from doing so. So this is how we know that they changed the Torah. Now, with the French Revolution, an economy based on riba emerges in Europe for the first time. And then with the Bolshevik Revolution in Eastern Europe, the possibility for Eastern Europe to be embraced by riba is also now open. But the banks in Europe, they don't just lend money on interest. The European economy not only produces this curious creature called a bank, the bank does something more than lending money on interest. What the bank does, and this began in France with an Englishman, what the bank does is to start issuing paper as money. Paper as money. And then when government saw that the banks were getting rich issuing paper as money, then the governments took over the paper. Then Europe sent her armies, and European armies shamelessly, at the point of a sword, those who say Islam was spread at the point of the sword, they're the ones who went with the point of the sword, and conquered the rest of the non-European world. And so a white world order emerges at the point of the sword, in which Europe now rules the world. When Europe took over the rest of the world, one of the most important things that Europe wanted to do was to dismantle the system of real money and replace it with paper money. And they achieved it because the scholars of Islam were eating halwa. Europe would not decolonize and hand over Egypt to Muhammad Naguib and Jamal Abdel Nasser for the drums to be beaten, we are independent, and would not hand over Indonesia to a fellow named Ahmad Sukarno so the Indonesians can jump for joy, we are independent now. And they would not hand over Malaysia to a fellow named Tunku Abdul Rahman, and they would not hand over Pakistan to another fellow named Muhammad Ali Jinnah, etc., 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 etc. And all the natives start dancing, drum beating. We have something called independence. While Europe is laughing its head behind the wall. Look at them. Blind like bats. Europe would not decolonize until Europe was ensured that a new financial system was in place in which real money was now replaced by paper money. At the beginning, when paper money was introduced, it was redeemable for gold. What does redeemable mean? Yes, exchange. In the United States of America, until the 1920s, you could take $20 US in notes, paper, and go to any bank, and you can ask for 1 ounce of gold, and you'll get it. If a man wants to cut your throat, he won't be so silly as to show you the sword, the knife. He has to hide the knife first, all right? Get you to come close. So, when paper money was introduced, it was redeemable in gold. And the banks that issued the paper money and the governments that issued the paper money, they gave their word that this is the value of the paper. And they even print on the paper, guess what they printed? In God we trust. Let me show you. Here is a US dollar note, and you can come and see it with your own eyes if you want. It says, in God we trust. In other words, when we give our word to you that 20 American dollars is equivalent to 1 ounce of gold, our word is as good and as solid as the word of God himself. But in 1933,